She had it all planned out, or at least, that's what everyone expected. Emma was the kind of girl who followed the rules, respected her parents, and knew the value of faith. But deep inside, a voice kept whispering that there was more to life than Sunday sermons and family dinners. It wasn't rebellion, it was curiosity, a burning desire to see what lay beyond the quiet streets of her small town. The American dream everyone around her believed in, a modest house, a stable job, maybe even a nice car, wasn't enough. She wanted freedom, wealth, the thrill of building something on her own. So, she left, packing up everything she knew to chase a future filled with both hope and fear. But no one warned her about the price she'd pay, the relationships she'd strain, or the heartache that would follow her to the city. And now, standing on the edge of success, she's faced with a question she never saw coming: can you really have it all? In the quiet streets of a small American town, Emma grew up surrounded by the warmth of tradition and the familiar rhythm of community life. Her house, a modest two-story with a white picket fence, stood across from the town's only church, where her family attended every Sunday without fail. The church bells rang out like a metronome for her childhood, marking the pace of time as she learned the values that shaped her. Her parents, deeply rooted in their faith, taught her the importance of obedience, humility, and hard work, lessons that would stay with her even as she began to question their meaning. In the simple moments, like sitting around the dinner table after a long day, Emma felt the weight of her family's expectations, but she also felt safe, anchored by their unwavering love. Her father worked long hours at the local market, where he spent his days loading and unloading boxes, while her mother kept their house spotless, ensuring everything ran smoothly. Their life was quiet, steady, and predictable, the kind of life many in town aspired to. It was the American dream for people like them, a small-town existence filled with close-knit relationships, where wealth wasn't measured in money but in the strength of community ties. Emma often found herself daydreaming as she walked the familiar streets, feeling both a deep connection to her roots and a longing for something more. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate what she had, it was that the world beyond seemed to offer so much more. Sunday afternoons were spent at church picnics, with the entire town gathered under the big oak trees in the park. Emma, dressed in her best, always felt the weight of eyes on her. After all, she was the pastor's favorite student in Sunday school, known for her piety and dedication. Her mother would beam with pride, and her father's approving nods reminded her of the standards she was expected to live up to. But as much as she loved the traditions, the quiet moments of reflection by the creek near her house, Emma began to feel a restlessness she couldn't quite explain. She knew, deep down, that her future might not fit into the mold her parents had shaped for her. Despite the peacefulness of small-town life, Emma's mind was always buzzing with questions. Her curiosity often led her to books her mother would raise an eyebrow at, novels about the big city, stories of women breaking free from their expected roles. She would sit for hours in her room, thumbing through pages that painted a different kind of American dream, one filled with opportunity, ambition, and the thrill of independence. Her parents noticed her growing fascination with the world beyond their town but didn't say much, perhaps hoping it was a phase she would outgrow. But for Emma, these stories weren't just entertainment, they were possibilities. Emma's connection to her family was undeniable. Her father's quiet strength and her mother's nurturing ways had shaped her into a thoughtful, compassionate young woman. Yet, as she watched the same familiar faces in town each day, she couldn't shake the feeling that her destiny lay somewhere far beyond the boundaries of this place. She admired the simplicity of small-town life, but she also felt a pull, a voice inside her that whispered there was more out there. Her parents believed in staying rooted, in building a life based on tradition and faith, but Emma's mind was already wandering, imagining a future where she could define success on her own terms. By the time Emma was a teenager, the tension between the life she had known and the life she wanted to explore had grown stronger. Her father's lectures about responsibility and her mother's gentle reminders of the importance of family began to feel like restraints. At church, the sermons about faith and obedience started to clash with the questions swirling in her mind. Why did she have to follow this path? Wasn't there more to life than just following the rules? Emma felt guilty for her growing desire to break free, knowing that her family would never understand. Yet, the allure of the unknown was too powerful to ignore. One night, after another long family dinner filled with talk of local news and church events, Emma sat alone in her room, staring out the window at the stars. Her parents' voices drifted from downstairs, the sound of their easy conversation a comfort and a reminder of the stability they provided. But Emma's heart was racing, her thoughts miles away from this quiet life. She imagined herself walking down busy city streets, her mind buzzing with ideas, her future wide open and filled with possibilities. The mind was a powerful thing, she realized, and once it started to dream of something bigger, it was hard to turn back. The contrast between the life she was born into and the life she dreamed of became clearer with each passing day. Emma loved her parents and valued the lessons they had taught her, but she couldn't ignore the growing sense of disconnection. The wealth her parents spoke of, the wealth of a strong family, of faith, of community, was important, but it wasn't the only kind of wealth she craved. She wanted to build something of her own, something that would allow her to leave her mark on the world. The small-town American dream, with its houses and cars and simple contentment, wasn't enough anymore. Emma's dream was different, and soon, she would have to choose. As Emma grew older, the tension between her upbringing and her personal desires became impossible to ignore. The quiet streets of her small town, once comforting, now felt suffocating. Every corner seemed to whisper of expectations: marry young, settle down, stay close to family, and follow the well-trodden path her parents had laid out. But Emma's mind had started to drift far beyond these familiar surroundings. She would spend her afternoons scrolling through images of cityscapes, bustling markets, and modern apartments, dreaming of a life where wealth wasn't just measured in family values but in freedom, success, and opportunity. The more she imagined, the more she questioned if this small town could ever hold the future she craved. Her conversations with her parents began to shift as well. At first, it was subtle, her mother's offhand remarks about the importance of staying close to home, or her father's warnings about the dangers of the big city. But as Emma started talking more openly about her ambitions, the tension became more apparent. "Why would you want to leave everything behind?" her mother would ask, her voice filled with concern. Emma could only offer vague answers, unable to fully explain the pull she felt. She respected her parents' way of life, but deep down, she knew she wanted something different. The American dream they had built was admirable, but Emma's dream was evolving. There were moments when Emma wondered if she was being selfish. After all, her family had given her so much: a stable home, unwavering support, a foundation of faith and love. But no matter how much she tried to push the feelings away, the desire for more only grew stronger. The city called to her, with its promises of success, wealth, and independence. She would imagine herself in a high-rise office, making decisions that impacted the world, driving a sleek car through the streets, and returning to an apartment she had earned through her own hard work. The possibilities seemed endless, but they also came with a price, one she wasn't sure she was ready to pay. Her father, a man of few words, began to notice the change in her. He'd watch her at the dinner table, the way her eyes would glaze over during discussions of local events or church activities. "You've been different lately," he said one evening, his voice gentle but firm. Emma hesitated, unsure how to explain the storm of emotions inside her. I want more," she finally admitted. The room fell silent. Her father's expression didn't change, but Emma could feel the weight of his disapproval. In his mind, wanting more meant rejecting everything they had worked for: the house, the community, the stability. But for Emma, wanting more meant embracing a new version of the American dream, one that included ambition and success. Emma found herself torn between two worlds, one that valued tradition, family, and faith, and another that promised wealth, opportunity, and independence. She would sit in church, listening to the pastor's sermons about the importance of staying true to one's roots, and feel an overwhelming sense of guilt. Her parents had given her so much, and yet here she was, dreaming of leaving it all behind. The conflict raged within her, and it wasn't just about geography, it was about identity. Could she be both the girl her parents raised and the woman she wanted to become? Or would she have to choose between the two? The more Emma thought about the future, the more restless she became. She started to feel like an outsider in her own life, as if the person she was on the inside no longer matched the person her family expected her to be. Her mind was constantly buzzing with possibilities, but every time she tried to talk about her dreams, she was met with confusion or concern. "What's wrong with the life we've built here?" her father asked one night, his voice heavy with disappointment. Emma couldn't bring herself to answer, because the truth was, there was nothing wrong with it. It just wasn't enough for her. Late at night, when the town was quiet and the stars shone brightly above, Emma would lie awake, imagining what her life could look like if she took the leap. The thought of leaving behind her family, her community, and the only life she had ever known filled her with fear. But the thought of staying, of never discovering what else was out there, terrified her even more. She knew the market was tough, especially for someone like her, but she also knew she had the drive and ambition to succeed. She had always believed in the power of the mind, and now, she was ready to test just how far hers could take her. Every day, the pull between staying and leaving became stronger, and Emma knew she was approaching a breaking point. The desire for more wealth, more freedom, more opportunity, was consuming her, and it was only a matter of time before she would have to make a choice. Could she find a way to honor her family's values while pursuing her own dreams, or would she have to leave everything behind to build the life she wanted? The conflict weighed heavily on her heart, but deep down, Emma knew one thing for sure: she couldn't stay in this small town forever. The decision to leave came slowly, like the gradual changing of the seasons. Emma had spent so many nights lying awake, torn between the safety of her small-town life and the unknown possibilities that lay beyond. But one evening, as she stood by the window of her childhood home, watching the familiar streets bathed in the glow of the setting sun, she felt it: this was no longer enough. Her mind was made up. She had to leave. It wasn't a rejection of her roots or a dismissal of the love her family had given her. It was a step toward becoming the person she knew she was meant to be. The day she packed her suitcase felt surreal, the finality of it settling in with every item she folded into the bag. Her parents stood at the doorway, their faces a mixture of pride and worry. They had always known that Emma was different, that her dreams extended far beyond the borders of their town. Still, seeing her walk away was harder than they imagined. Her mother hugged her tightly, whispering words of love and faith, while her father stood back, his silence speaking volumes. "Are you sure this is what you want?" her father finally asked, his voice heavy with the weight of unspoken fears. Emma hesitated, her heart aching, but she nodded. "I have to try, Dad," she replied, her voice steady but filled with emotion. This wasn't just a physical departure, it was the beginning of a new life. As the bus pulled away from the small station, Emma watched the town shrink into the distance, her mind racing with excitement and fear. The streets she had walked every day of her life, the house where she had shared countless family meals, the church where she had learned the values of faith and community, they all faded away, replaced by the vast unknown. Emma couldn't help but feel a sense of loss, as though she were leaving a piece of herself behind. But she knew this was the price of chasing her dreams. Sometimes, in order to grow, you had to let go of the familiar and step into the unknown. Her journey to the city was a mix of emotions: exhilaration at the thought of what lay ahead and a gnawing fear of what she had left behind. The city skyline appeared in the distance, a stark contrast to the rolling hills and open skies she had grown up with. The towering buildings and endless stream of cars filled her with a sense of awe. This was the place where dreams were made, where wealth and success were within reach if you were willing to fight for them. Emma took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision settling on her shoulders. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. The first night in her small apartment was quiet, the sounds of the bustling city outside her window a constant reminder that she was no longer in her small town. The apartment was modest, but it was hers, her first step toward independence. As she unpacked, she couldn't help but think about her family back home. She missed them already, especially her mother's reassuring voice and her father's steady presence. But there was no turning back now. This was the life she had chosen, and with it came the challenges of carving out her place in the world. Emma knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face whatever came her way. The city, with all its chaos and opportunity, was overwhelming at first. Emma found herself swept up in the fast pace, the constant movement, and the sheer scale of it all. But beneath the surface, she felt a sense of excitement. This was where she was meant to be. She had left behind the quiet certainty of her small-town life for the unpredictable world of the big city, and she was determined to make it. Every step she took felt like a small victory, each new street she walked down, each new face she met. It was all part of building a new life, one that reflected the dreams she had nurtured for so long. Still, the weight of her departure lingered in her heart. The phone calls home were filled with polite updates and reassurances, but Emma could sense the distance growing between her and her family. Her mother's voice, once so familiar, now felt distant. "We miss you," her mother would say softly, and Emma's chest would tighten with guilt. But this was the price of chasing something bigger, something more. She couldn't have it all, at least not right now. The road to success required sacrifices, and Emma was willing to make them, even if it meant feeling a little lost along the way. But amidst the uncertainty, there was hope. Emma had always believed that the American dream was about more than just where you came from, it was about where you were going. And she was going to make something of herself, no matter how hard it got. The city offered endless possibilities, and for the first time, Emma felt like she was truly in control of her destiny. It was scary, yes, but it was also exhilarating. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure: she was ready to find out. Emma's first few months in the city were a whirlwind of long hours, late nights, and the constant buzz of ambition. She had landed an entry-level job at a tech startup, a far cry from the quiet life she had known, but exactly the kind of challenge she had craved. The office was a sea of screens and innovative ideas, with colleagues constantly bouncing between meetings and brainstorming sessions. It was fast-paced, demanding, and relentless, but Emma thrived in the chaos. She found herself working harder than ever before, her mind racing with ideas for projects and improvements. The city had unlocked something inside her, a drive to succeed that she hadn't fully understood before. The transition wasn't easy, though. There were moments when Emma doubted herself, wondering if she had made the right decision. The tech world was competitive, and for someone without the connections or background of her peers, it often felt like she was constantly playing catch-up. She faced discrimination and skepticism, especially as a young woman trying to make her mark in a male-dominated field. There were days when the pressure felt overwhelming, when the long hours in front of her computer screen blurred into endless nights of self-doubt. But every time she considered giving up, she reminded herself of why she had left her small town in the first place. Emma's perseverance paid off. Little by little, she began to earn the respect of her colleagues. She stayed late, took on extra projects, and delivered results. When a major client needed a new software solution, Emma jumped at the chance to prove herself. She worked tirelessly, pouring everything she had into the project, and when it succeeded, the praise was immediate. Her boss called her into his office, his tone one of surprise and admiration. "You've got something special, Emma," he said, his words sticking with her long after the meeting ended. It was the validation she had been waiting for, proof that she belonged in this fast-paced, high-stakes world. As Emma's confidence grew, so did her ambition. She began to dream bigger, thinking about how she could move up the ladder, how she could create something of her own. The city had given her a taste of success, and now she wanted more. She started networking with other professionals, attending industry events, and soaking up every bit of knowledge she could. Her mind, once filled with doubts, now buzzed with possibilities. She had always known she was capable of more, and now she was beginning to see just how far her mind could take her. The wealth she had dreamed of, both in terms of money and opportunity, was finally within reach. But it wasn't just about the money. For Emma, success meant creating something meaningful, something that would stand the test of time. She wanted to build a company that reflected her values, one that gave back to the community and supported women like her, women who had come from humble beginnings but dreamed of something bigger. The more she thought about it, the more the idea took shape in her mind. She began laying the groundwork, putting together a business plan, and saving every dollar she could. The city was full of entrepreneurs, but Emma was determined to stand out. She wasn't just chasing success, she was building a legacy. Her first steps into entrepreneurship were slow and filled with uncertainty. There were countless setbacks, moments when she thought her idea would never get off the ground. But Emma was nothing if not persistent. She pushed through the doubts, leaned on the skills she had learned at the startup, and slowly began to build her own team. It wasn't long before her small company started gaining traction. They landed a few key clients, and suddenly, the dream that had seemed so distant was becoming a reality. Emma could hardly believe it. The girl who had once felt trapped in her small-town life was now leading her own company, making decisions that impacted lives. Despite her success, Emma never forgot where she came from. She often thought about her parents, about the lessons they had taught her about hard work and integrity. In many ways, those lessons had helped her navigate the cutthroat world of business. The American dream her parents had instilled in her, one of stability and community, wasn't so different from the dream she was now living. The only difference was that Emma had taken those values and applied them to a different world, one where wealth was measured not just in money but in the impact she was making. As her company grew, so did her vision for the future. Emma knew she wanted more than just financial success. She wanted to create opportunities for others, to build a company that made a difference in the world. Her mind was always working, always thinking about the next step. The city had transformed her, given her the tools to chase her dreams and turn them into reality. And while the journey had been anything but easy, Emma wouldn't have had it any other way. She was exactly where she was meant to be. As Emma's career took off, the distance between her and her family grew in ways she hadn't anticipated. The calls home became fewer, and the conversations with her parents, once filled with warmth and understanding, now felt strained. Her mother's voice, once comforting, now carried an edge of concern. "You're working so much, Emma," she would say, her worry palpable even over the phone. Emma always reassured her, promising she'd visit soon, but weeks turned into months, and the visits never came. The truth was, the more successful Emma became, the more out of place she felt in the world she had left behind. Her father, a man of few words, expressed his disappointment in subtler ways. The missed holidays, the unanswered calls, it all added up to a growing distance that neither of them knew how to bridge. Emma could hear it in his tone whenever they spoke. "We're proud of you," he'd say, but the unspoken words hung heavy between them. Proud, yes, but also confused, maybe even hurt. They didn't understand this new world she had entered, where success was measured in contracts and market shares, not in family gatherings or community events. The wealth Emma was accumulating in the city seemed to come at the cost of something more valuable, her connection to home. The breaking point came one Christmas when Emma, swamped with a major project, canceled her trip home at the last minute. Her mother's disappointment was clear, and the guilt weighed heavily on Emma's shoulders as she spent the holiday alone in her apartment, surrounded by the cold glow of city lights. The apartment that had once symbolized her independence now felt empty and sterile, a far cry from the warmth of her family's house back home. She sat in silence, staring at the untouched holiday decorations, feeling a deep sense of regret. For the first time, she wondered if the life she had built was worth the sacrifice. Emma's work consumed her, leaving little time for anything else. She was constantly on her phone, responding to emails, attending meetings, and chasing new opportunities. Her brothers sent texts asking when she'd visit, her mother left voicemails filled with concern, and her father simply stopped calling altogether. Emma told herself it was temporary, that once she reached the next milestone, she'd have time to reconnect. But deep down, she knew that the further she climbed, the more distant she became. The girl who had once sat at the family dinner table, dreaming of the city, now felt like a stranger in both worlds. One night, after a particularly long day at the office, Emma scrolled through old photos on her phone, pictures of family gatherings, church events, moments that seemed like they belonged to another lifetime. She paused on one of her parents, standing proudly in front of their house, arms around each other, their smiles bright and genuine. A lump formed in her throat. She missed them, missed the simplicity of that life, but she didn't know how to go back. Could she even fit into that world anymore? The life she had built in the city was so different, filled with ambition and success but lacking the warmth of home. The strain on her relationships was becoming more evident. Her parents had started to accept that Emma's visits would be rare, that her career had taken her far beyond their reach. But it didn't make the disconnection any easier to bear. Emma found herself feeling guilty, torn between her desire to continue building her empire and the growing realization that she was losing something irreplaceable. The calls home, once so frequent and full of laughter, now felt like obligations. She hated the way it felt, but she couldn't deny that her priorities had shifted. In her quiet moments, usually late at night when the city had finally slowed down, Emma would reflect on the choices she had made. The success, the money, the apartment with a view, they were all things she had dreamed of, but they had come at a cost. Her family, once her greatest source of strength, now felt like a distant memory. Emma wondered if it was possible to have both, the wealth and the deep connections, the ambition and the love. She wasn't sure, but the thought lingered in the back of her mind, gnawing at her as she continued to push forward. The disconnection wasn't something Emma could ignore forever. She knew that eventually, something would have to give. Her career, though thriving, no longer brought the same sense of fulfillment. The deeper she dove into her work, the more hollow her victories felt. And every time she looked at her phone, at the missed calls and unread messages from her family, the guilt crept in. She had wanted to escape her small-town life, but now, she wasn't so sure she had made the right choice. The price of success, it seemed, was higher than she had ever imagined. Emma's return home was not planned, but life had a way of pulling her back when she least expected it. A phone call late one evening from her younger brother shattered the routine she had grown accustomed to. Her father had fallen ill. The news hit her like a wave, and for the first time in years, Emma felt the overwhelming need to be there for her family. She packed her bags hastily, her mind racing with thoughts of regret. It had been too long since her last visit, too long since she had hugged her parents, shared a meal with them, or simply spent time in their presence. The drive back to the small town felt endless, the city lights fading behind her as the quiet countryside stretched out ahead. When Emma arrived at her childhood home, the once familiar sight of the house now stirred a mixture of emotions. The years had changed her parents' faces, her father looked older, more fragile than she remembered, and her mother's eyes carried a weight Emma hadn't noticed before. Their embrace was awkward at first, as though time had placed a barrier between them. But as they sat down together, the warmth slowly returned, the walls of distance starting to crumble. Her father, though weak, smiled at her in a way that reminded her of how much she had missed. The years she had spent chasing success in the city now seemed insignificant compared to the time she had lost with her family. Her mother, always the peacemaker, welcomed Emma with open arms, but there was an unspoken tension between them. The strain of the past few years lingered in the air, their conversations polite but guarded. Emma wanted to explain, to tell her mother that the disconnection wasn't intentional, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, they sat in silence, both aware of the gap that had grown between them. The small town, once a place of comfort, now felt foreign to Emma. She wasn't sure where she fit anymore, too far removed from the simplicity of this life but not entirely at home in the chaos of the city either. During her stay, Emma found herself back in the church she had grown up in, sitting in the same wooden pews that had once felt so confining. The faces around her were familiar, yet they had changed, much like everything else in this town. As the pastor spoke, Emma couldn't help but reflect on her journey, how far she had come, but also how far she had drifted from the values she had been raised with. The sermons about faith, family, and community struck a chord in her that she hadn't felt in years. She realized that, in her pursuit of success, she had lost touch with the things that once grounded her. Conversations with her parents were tentative at first, filled with long pauses and hesitant words. But slowly, the barriers began to break down. One evening, as they sat together at the dinner table, Emma's mother placed a hand on hers. "We're proud of you, Emma," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "But we've missed you." The weight of those words hit Emma hard. For years, she had been chasing the American dream, building her wealth and success in the city, but now she realized that the true wealth she had left behind was her family. The realization was bittersweet, but it opened her eyes to what really mattered. The homecoming wasn't just about reconnecting with her family, it was about reconciling the two parts of herself that had been at odds for so long. Emma spent time walking the quiet streets of her town, visiting old friends, and sitting on the porch with her parents, talking about life in a way they hadn't in years. There were still moments of tension, but there was also healing. She realized that she didn't have to choose between her career and her family, her ambition and her roots. The two could coexist, but it would require balance, a balance she hadn't been able to find before. As her father's health improved, Emma found herself staying longer than she had planned. The fast-paced world of the city felt distant, and for the first time in a long time, Emma allowed herself to slow down. She spent her days helping around the house, reconnecting with her brothers, and listening to her parents' stories. It was as though time had slowed to a crawl, giving her space to breathe, to think, to feel. The disconnection she had felt was still there, but it was beginning to heal, piece by piece. Emma wasn't just reconnecting with her family, she was reconnecting with herself. By the time Emma was ready to return to the city, she felt different. The homecoming had changed her, given her a new perspective on what it meant to be successful. She still wanted to pursue her dreams, to continue building the company she had worked so hard to create. But now, she understood that success didn't have to come at the cost of her relationships. As she hugged her parents goodbye, promising to visit more often, Emma felt a sense of peace. She was no longer running from her past or her future, she was learning how to bring the two together. Emma returned to the city with a renewed sense of purpose. The trip back home had given her clarity, she didn't have to abandon her career to honor her family, nor did she need to forsake her roots to succeed in the corporate world. Instead, she could be the bridge between the two. The city was still where her ambitions thrived, but now, she understood that her upbringing gave her the foundation to handle everything that had come her way. Her success wasn't in spite of her past, but because of it. As she settled back into the rhythm of her company, she began to see opportunities to integrate the values of her small-town life with the fast-paced world of tech. One of the first things Emma did was reach out to communities like the one she had grown up in, looking for ways to support them through her business. She had always believed in the power of innovation, but now she saw it as a tool to uplift those who often went unnoticed in the bustling world of entrepreneurship. Emma started programs aimed at helping women from rural areas break into tech, providing mentorship and resources to those who, like her, had once felt the pull between family obligations and personal dreams. It wasn't just about giving back, it was about creating a legacy that honored both her past and her future. Her role as a leader began to shift as well. Emma became known not just for her business acumen but for her advocacy for small communities and underrepresented voices in the industry. She found that her upbringing in a small town had given her a unique perspective on what it meant to lead with compassion and integrity. As she spoke at conferences and business forums, she shared her story, not just of success in the city, but of the lessons she had learned from her family, from faith, and from the close-knit community that had shaped her. People listened, drawn to her authenticity, and Emma felt a deeper connection to her work than ever before. The balancing act wasn't always easy. There were still moments when the demands of her career clashed with her desire to stay connected to her family. But Emma had learned to prioritize differently. She no longer let months pass without calling home. She visited her parents more often, not out of obligation but out of a genuine desire to stay connected to the people who had given her so much. And in doing so, she realized that she could have both, a thriving career and a close relationship with her family. It was a delicate balance, but it was one she was now committed to maintaining. Emma's family, too, began to see the changes in her. They no longer felt as though her success had taken her away from them. Instead, they saw how it had brought her full circle, allowing her to return to her roots with a deeper understanding of who she was and what mattered most. Her parents, once unsure of her decisions, now looked at her with pride, not just for what she had accomplished in her career, but for the way she had remained true to the values they had instilled in her. It was a kind of reconciliation that Emma hadn't thought possible, but now, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. In her professional life, Emma continued to grow. Her company expanded, and with it, so did her influence. But her success was no longer just about wealth or status, it was about making a difference. She became a mentor to young women, helping them navigate the complexities of balancing ambition with personal values. Her story resonated with many, particularly those who, like her, came from backgrounds where success in the corporate world seemed out of reach. Emma had become a role model, not just for her business achievements but for her ability to stay grounded, to honor both the world she had come from and the one she now thrived in. The community she had once felt so disconnected from was now a source of strength. Emma often returned to her hometown, not just to visit her family but to work on projects that supported the local economy. She used her platform to advocate for rural communities, ensuring that they weren't left behind in the fast-moving world of technology and innovation. It was in these moments, when she was standing in front of a room full of people who reminded her of her younger self, that Emma felt most fulfilled. She had found a way to bring her two worlds together, and in doing so, she had created something lasting. Emma's journey wasn't just about finding success in the city or reconnecting with her family. It was about learning that the two didn't have to be mutually exclusive. She could honor her roots while still chasing her dreams, and in fact, her background gave her the strength and perspective she needed to thrive. By integrating the lessons of her small-town life with the opportunities of the big city, Emma had created a life that was rich in both meaning and success. The American dream she had once envisioned was now more complex, but it was also more fulfilling than she had ever imagined. Years later, as Emma stood on the stage at a conference, addressing a room full of aspiring entrepreneurs, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. The city skyline stretched behind her, a backdrop to the story she was telling, one of ambition, resilience, and finding balance between two very different worlds. The audience listened intently as Emma shared the lessons she had learned, not just about business, but about life. Success isn't just about the wealth you build, she said, her voice steady and sure. It's about staying true to who you are and remembering where you came from. Her message resonated deeply with the room, and Emma felt a profound sense of peace. This was her legacy. Emma had found a way to integrate the values of her small-town upbringing with the ambitious dreams that had driven her to the city. Her company, now a leader in the tech industry, had become a model for how businesses could operate with integrity and compassion. But more than that, Emma's personal journey had become an inspiration for others. She had shown that it was possible to chase big dreams without losing sight of what really mattered, family, community, and the lessons that had shaped her along the way. Her story wasn't just about achieving success, it was about defining success on her own terms. Her family, once unsure of her choices, now looked at her with pride. They saw the ways in which Emma had stayed connected to her roots, even as her career took her to new heights. Her parents, who had once worried that she would lose herself in the fast-paced world of the city, now understood that the values they had instilled in her were the very foundation of her success. Emma's visits home had become more frequent, and the bond with her family had deepened in ways she hadn't thought possible. The reconciliation, once a distant hope, was now a beautiful reality. She had found harmony between the two worlds she loved. In her business, Emma continued to push for innovation, but always with a focus on creating opportunities for others. She had made it her mission to support women and communities that were often overlooked in the tech industry. Through mentorship programs, partnerships with rural communities, and a commitment to ethical business practices, Emma's impact extended far beyond her own success. She was building something lasting, something that would continue to make a difference long after she was gone. Her legacy wasn't just the company she had built, it was the lives she had touched along the way. There were still moments when Emma felt the weight of responsibility, the pressure to keep moving forward, to achieve more. But those moments were now balanced by the deep sense of fulfillment she felt in her personal life. Her family, her community, and the people she worked with, they were all part of the life she had built. And for the first time, Emma felt like she truly belonged in both worlds. The city had given her the platform to achieve her dreams, but her small-town roots had given her the strength to make those dreams a reality. She had found a way to have both, and in doing so, she had created a life filled with meaning and purpose. As she stood there, looking out at the audience, Emma felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. The journey had been long, filled with challenges, heartbreak, and moments of doubt. But it had also been beautiful, filled with love, growth, and the discovery of who she truly was. The girl who had once felt trapped by the expectations of her small town had become a woman who embraced both her past and her future. Emma smiled as she closed her speech, leaving the audience with a final thought: no matter where your journey takes you, never forget where you started. That's where your strength comes from. In the end, Emma's legacy wasn't just about the business she had built or the money she had earned. It was about the people she had helped, the communities she had uplifted, and the families she had reconnected with. It was about proving that success didn't have to come at the cost of your values or your relationships. You could have both, ambition and compassion, success and integrity, wealth and love. And as Emma looked toward the future, she knew that this was just the beginning of the story she would leave behind. A story of resilience, connection, and the power of finding harmony between two worlds. Emma's story leaves us with a question: is it possible to chase your dreams without losing yourself along the way? Could you leave everything you know behind to pursue something bigger, even if it meant risking the relationships that matter most? I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in Emma's shoes? Have you ever faced a similar choice between ambition and staying true to your roots? Drop your comments below, and let's talk about it. And before you go, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. There are more stories like Emma's, filled with real struggles, hard choices, and powerful lessons. Don't miss out on the next one. We've got some incredible journeys to share, and I can't wait to see you there.